I had a chance to talk to Dan about his experiences on the U.S. Mexico border. I first asked him for impressions that stood out from the people on both sides of this emotional debate.
Certainly there has been a number of contrasting and diverse viewpoints as to what really are the key issues in terms of the US-Mexico border. And certainly there are a number of questions that you still keep coming back to. First of all, is the wall a solution? We heard from a diverse range of people there as to some that really believe that the wall will go some way to giving the US the protection that some, including the US President Donald Trump, is after, while others say that all a more reinforced wall will bring is further deaths and further desperation. And certainly those pretty much the key contrasting moments, I would say, from this.
Was it difficult to get people to open up and talk about this with you?
In terms of arranging access with the border police, that takes some time in setting up. That access to the tunnel, for example, required 3 border officers to be in attendance. So that's a huge amount of manpower, and of course they have their own real job to do. But also we sit with some of the legal teams as well. One interview had to be cancelled because they were suddenly called in order to assist with an ongoing situation of a migrant that had recently crossed over. So that would be the key thing. There's also a huge amount of media interest. That too is placing a huge amount of burden on the various stories and places across the border. Annunciation House, which is a shelter in El Paso, for example, wouldn't commit to any kind of interview until we were down there, given the amount of requests that they get. So those 2 elements are clearly key, but also trying to set up interviews with migrants themselves as well. It has to be remembered that for most of the people that arrive in the US across these border towns, they spend somewhere 24 hours or so in those towns before they then depart to other areas if they have then been cleared by the US authorities. So clearly then setting up those kind of interviews as well is also very challenging.
And yet in your first piece, you actually shot a family crossing the border. How did you meet them and the coyote, and what motivated them, and what motivated the coyote?
Well, certainly as far as that particular person was concerned, the coyote, he actually doesn't describe himself as that, but rather someone who tries to help families get across that first line of defense. We've got this rather bizarre situation right now whereby it can take upwards of a month or so for asylum applications to be processed, and because of that it means that there are families like this one, if they have children, then they attempt to try and cross through that first fence and then present themselves to the border authorities. By doing so, it presents the problem to them. I think though what was key to come out of that as well was to just see how quickly it took for this so-called coyote to get to the very top of that fence. Now, although they are building the fences taller, certainly on that second element, it just goes to show that where there's a will, there's a way. And certainly, as far as many of these coyotes are concerned, it doesn't matter what you put in place, there will always be a way to break through those barriers.
Any final thoughts in terms of watching this migration crisis, not just here in the United States on the border between Mexico and the United States, but also in Europe? Are there similarities, dissimilarities, any takeaways that you can come with?
Certainly there are huge similarities. The fact of the matter is that there, certainly in terms of the European migrant crisis, and we covered it where we saw a lot of people coming up from sub-Saharan Africa, coming through Morocco, coming through Libya and into Europe. The same stories of just sheer desperation, if nothing else, the reasons that motivated them to come. It all goes back to the push and pull factors, and we're seeing a lot of people perhaps saying that there are a number of pull factors to come to the US. But again and again, speaking to migrants both in Africa, in Italy, and here at the US border, it seems as though for most people it really wasn't about that. Many people having to flee to save the lives of their families. That was the overriding message I got, certainly from the migrants I spoke to.
Dan Williams there.